Tonight in Victorian London was a thing of shadows, and soot a city that never truly slept, but never truly woke. Either its streets echoing, with the shuffle of tired boots, and the rattle of carriage wheels over cobblestones slick with rain. The air was heavy with coal smoke, damp fog, and the faint sourness of spilled ale from taverns that had long since closed their doors to the poor. For those who had no home, no hearth, no bed to claim, the night was not a time of rest, but of negotiation, a bargaining with hunger, with cold, with the relentless ticking of hours that refused to pass quickly. And in this world of weary souls there existed the penny bench, the cheapest of refuges, a place where one could pay a single coin not for sleep, not for comfort, but merely for the right to sit indoors until morning. Imagine the room, dimly lit by a single gas lamp that hissed faintly in the corner, its light casting long, trembling shadows across the walls. The benches were wooden, hard, and narrow, lined up in rows like pews in a church that had forgotten its prayers. Men shuffled in, their coats threadbare, their boots worn thin, their faces hollowed by hunger and exhaustion. Each one dropped a penny into the keeper's hand, the small metallic sound swallowed by the silence of resignation. They sat, shoulders hunched, eyes half closed, but they were not allowed to lie down. The rules were strict. No sprawling, no stretching, no surrender to true sleep. Only sitting, only waiting, only enduring. The air was thick with the smell of damp wool and unwashed bodies, the occasional cough breaking the stillness like a reminder that life clung stubbornly even here. Some nodded forward, jerking awake as their chins struck their chests. Others stared blankly at the floorboards, their minds wandering to memories of better days or to dreams of meals they would never taste. The penny bench was not rest, it was survival, a pause in the endless march of fatigue. Outside, the rain tapped against the windows, and the city carried on, indifferent to the silent congregation of the weary. Yet even in this bleakness, there was a strange solidarity, a fellowship of the forgotten, each man's suffering mirrored in the posture of the one beside him. The night stretched long, and the bench creaked beneath. For those who could spare to pennies, there was another option, though it was no less cruel in its ingenuity. The two-penny hangover. They called it, though the name carried a bitter irony, for it was not the hangover of drink, but of poverty. In a narrow room, a thick rope was strung from one wall to the other, taut and unyielding. For the price of 2 coins, a man could lean forward against it, drape his arms over it, and surrender to a half-sleep that was neither sitting nor lying, but something in between, a parody of rest. Picture the scene. Rows of men slumped forward, their bodies swaying gently like pendulums, their faces pressed into the crook of their arms, their breath rising and falling in uneven rhythm. The rope cut into their flesh, leaving red marks on their arms and torsos, but they endured it, for it was better than the cold. Streets better than the endless walking that kept the blood moving but drained the spirit. The keeper would sometimes walk the rows, making sure no one slipped too far, no one collapsed entirely, for the rope was not meant to cradle but to restrain. The room smelled of sweat and rope fibers, of damp straw scattered on the floor to catch the drool and the occasional collapse. The silence was broken only by the groans of shifting bodies, the coughs of consumptives, the muttered dreams of men too tired to know they were speaking. It was a grotesque sight, yet it was real, a testament to the ingenuity of desperation, to the way poverty invents its own forms of cruelty. And when morning came, the rope was cut down, the men roused, their 2 pennies spent, their bodies aching, their eyes bloodshot. But they rose and shuffled back into the city, ready to chase another day of labor, another day of hunger, another night of bargaining with coins and exhaustion. The 2-penny hangover was not rest. It was a transaction, a cruel compromise between body and coin, between the need to collapse and to grant even that mercy freely. And then there was the 4-penny coffin, the most expensive of the cheap options, a wooden box just wide enough for a body, lined with a thin layer of straw that smelled of mildew and dust. 4 pennies. A man could lie down, could stretch his limbs, could close his eyes without fear of being jolted awake by the rules of the bench or the bite of the rope. But the coffin was no bed. It was a box, narrow and confining, its sides pressing close like the embrace of the grave. They called it a coffin because that is what it resembled, rows of wooden boxers, lined up in a dim room, each one occupied by a man who looked in the flickering lamplight like a corpse laid out for burial. The air was heavy with the sound of breathing, of snores, of coughs that rattled deep in the chest. The straw rustled as bodies shifted, seeking comfort where none could be found. Some clutched their coats around them, others curled into themselves, their faces hidden in the shadows. It was the closest thing to sleep that poverty allowed, and for many it was worth the 4 pennies, worth the sacrifice of a meal, worth the humiliation of lying in a box that mocked the very idea of rest. The coffin was both refuge and reminder, a place where the living rehearsed for death, where the line between shelter and grave blurred in the dim light of survival. And yet, for those who lay there, it was something, a chance to dream, however briefly, of warmth, of food, of a life beyond the box. Morning always came too soon, the keeper rapping on the sides of the coffins, the men stirring, groaning, rising from their wooden beds like the resurrected, their eyes hollow, their bodies stiff, their pennies spent. They filed out into the streets, into the fog and the smoke, into the endless labor of survival, carrying with them the memory of the box, the rope, the bench, the cruel arithmetic of T's. Was Victorian England, a world of progress and empire, of railways and factories, of wealth displayed in glittering shop windows and poverty hidden in dim lodging houses. The penny bench, the 2-penny hangover, the 4-penny coffinies were not curiosities, but realities, the nightly choices of thousands who lived on the margins of a society that celebrated its greatness while ignoring its suffering. To sleep rough was not always to sleep on the streets. Sometimes it was to pay for the privilege of discomfort, to exchange the last coin in one's pocket for a night of endurance. And in the telling of these nights, in the slow unfolding of their details, we glimpse not only the cruelty of poverty, but the resilience of those who endured it, who found ways to survive in a world that offered them so little. The benches creaked, the ropes sagged, the coffins closed, and still the city carried on, its heart beating with the footsteps of the weary, its lungs filled with the smoke of industry, its soul divided between progress and neglect. And so the story lingers, a whisper in the fog, a reminder that history is not only the tale of kings and empires, but of pennies spent in the dark, of men who paid for the right to sit, to hang, to lie, to endure another night in the endless city. The fog rolled in from the Thames like a living thing, curling around the gas lamps and swallowing the outlines of buildings until the city seemed half dream, half nightmare. The hour was late, and the streets of London were thinning. The respectable folk tucked away in their homes, while the forgotten drifted through alleys and side roads, searching for a place to endure the darkness. Among them walked a man whose name no one asked and no one cared to know. His boots were worn to the sole, his coat patched and frayed, his pockets nearly empty, save for a few coins that clinked together like the last fragile hope of the day. He had worked once, carried bricks for a mason, hauled crates at the docks, but the work had dried up, and with it his bed, his meals, his place in the world. Now he walked with the others, eyes thought of where he might rest his body until morning. The first stop was the penny bench. A canoe at Twelve had sat there many nights before, and though it offered no comfort, it offered something better than the cold stones of the street. He pushed open the door of the lodging-house, the hinges groaning like an old man's bones, and stepped into the dim room. The air was thick with the smell of damp wool and sweat, the faint hiss of a gas lamp casting shadows that trembled across the walls. A row of benches stretched before him, already filled with men, slumped forward, their eyes half closed, their bodies swaying with exhaustion. He dropped a penny into the keeper's hand, the sound sharp in the silence, and took his place on the hard wood. The bench creaked beneath him, unforgiving, but it was a seat, and for a moment he allowed himself to close his eyes. Yet the rules were strict. No lying down, no stretching out, no surrender to true sleep. He nodded forward, jerking awake as his chin struck his chest, the ache in his neck reminding him that this was not rest, but around him, others did the same, a silent congregation of the weary, each man locked in his own battle with fatigue. The hours dragged, the lamp hissed, the rain tapped against the window, and he thought of the coins still in his pocket. 1 penny? Gaunt. 2. Left, he could sit. Body cried out for more. When the keeper's back was turned, he rose quietly and slipped out into the night once more. The fog clung to him, dampening his hair, seeping into his bones. He walked a short distance to another house, one he had heard of but seldom dared to enter. The two-penny hangover, they called it, though the name was cruel, for it was not the hangover of drink but of poverty. Inside, the room was narrow, a thick rope stretched taut from one wall to the other. Men leaned forward against it, their arms draped over, their bodies swaying like pendulums in the half-light. He paid his 2 pennies, the last of his coins, save one, and took his place among them. The rope was rough beneath his arms, biting into his flesh, but it held him upright, allowed his body to sag in a parody of rest. His head drooped forward, his breath came heavy, and for a time he drifted in and out of a shallow, broken sleep. Around him, others groaned, coughed, muttered in their dreams. The rope creaked under the weight of so many bodies, and the air was thick with the smell of sweat and rope fibers. It was not comfort, but it was something, a cruel compromise between collapse and endurance. Hours passed, though he could not say how many, and when he stirred again, his arms ached, his back burned, and his eyes were red with fatigue. He thought of the last coin in his pocket, the single penny that remained, and he knew he could not spend enough. His body stiff, his legs trembling, and stepped back into the fog. The city was silent now, the streets empty save for the occasional rattle of a carriage in the distance. He walked with no clear direction, guided only by the thought of the 4-penny coffin. He had heard of it, seen it once, rows of wooden boxers lined up in a dim room, each one just wide enough for a body. It was the most expensive, the cheap options, and he had never had the coins to spare. But tonight, he thought, perhaps he could beg, perhaps he could trade the last of his pride for the chance to lie down. He found the house, at last, its door marked by a faint glow of lamplight. Inside, the keeper looked at him with suspicion, his eyes narrowing at the sight of a man with only 1 coin. But desperation has its own language, and with a few words, a promise of labor tomorrow, a plea spoken in a voice cracked with exhaustion, the keeper relented. He was shown to a box, narrow and confining, lined with straw that smelled of mildew and dust. He lay down, stretching his limbs for the first time that night, and felt the sides of the box press close around him. It was no bed, but it was something, and as he closed his eyes, he thought of how it resembled a coffin, how the men around him looked like corpses laid out for burial. Yet he did not care. For the first time in days, he slept. The hours passed, and morning came too soon. The keeper rapped on the sides of the coffins, the men stirring, groaning, rising from their wooden beds like the resurrected. He rose with them, his body stiff, his eyes hollow, his coins gone. He stepped out into the fog once more, the city waking around him, the sound of footsteps and carriage wheels filling the air. Another day awaited, another day of labor, of hunger, of searching for coins to trade for the right to sit, to hang, to lie, to endure another night in the endless city. And as he walked, he thought of the benches, the rope, the coffin, the cruel arithmetic of poverty.